All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to come on down to Versailles, Kentucky, and it's not Versailles. They will absolutely exclude you and not have a conversation. So make sure if you're heading down to Versailles, Kentucky, you pronounce it properly. At the new technical training facility from NAVAC. And so we're going to spend a little time today diving into this A2L transition. We spent a lot of time talking about A2L tools and refrigerants and equipment, but we haven't been very specific on those tool requirements. So Ty and I have had this conversation many times as, Ari, we got to start having some really good in-depth conversations on tools for A2Ls and eventually for A3s, right? So we have a lot of things to stay up to date. So hanging out today with Jesse Stewart. Jesse, what's going on, man?
Doing fine, Clifton.
So I'm grateful to be down here. We have a variety of things that we're going to go through with you today. We're going to do some hands-on demonstrations with some evacuation. We'll talk about proper tools and practices, but we really want to dive deep into what is the tools going to be looking like going forward? Do I need to re-look at my arsenal of tools and have a better understanding of what things need to be updated? I may have tools that are already A2L compatible, but I may not. And that's really what we're here to do. And definitely let us know where you're joining in from. We're grateful that everyone's here today. And I see Todd out there. Todd, sunny Southern California. That's fantastic. We want you to be a part of this community. So share with us where you are. Share with us any questions and concerns that you have along this experience as well. So Ty, what kind of questions have you been getting about A2L tools in particular?
Let's see. We have to buy everything new again, and it's end of the world, and we're all going to blow up.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the common themes, right? And it's really not that, but there are things that need to be focused on. So we've been working very closely with our equipment manufacturers as well as our tool manufacturers. And there we go, absolutely, more sales in the house. We wanted to spend a little time getting very close with what's happening. So we've been working real diligently with NAVAC on A2L training and what the equipment and what the safe practices look like. And so now here we are diving into what's going to be expected, right, tool-wise. So before we dive too deep, let's talk about a variety of refrigerants that we're going to see, okay? We're going to be transitioning away from R410A in residential systems. We've talked about that a lot. We've already done it in all of our Type 1 systems. They've all went to pretty much R32. But we have a variety of refrigerants that's going to fall into this A2L classification. So Jesse, tell us a variety of some of the refrigerants that we're going to be seeing or already seeing in the A2L environment.
Absolutely. Well, so a lot of the concern when we talk about the A2Ls is they hear that lower flammability limit.
Yes.
And they immediately panic ensues and there starts becoming Facebook memes.
Hey, it's got propane in it.
Yeah, it's got propane in it. That's the big one.
No. No propane.
So, and on the list, you see right here on the screen, it's a list of A2L refrigerants. However, the primary ones that you're going to deal with are going to be that R32 and R454B. Now, fun fact for you, if you're driving anything from 2016 and newer, you've probably been driving around with an A2L refrigerant already inside your car.
2016 Ram.
2016 TRD.
Oh, look at there. All right.
So that being said, you guys have been driving around. Oh, what's happened here? Here we go. You guys have been driving around with a A2L in your vehicle all this time and didn't pay it any attention. So, and something else I think you'll find too, and we'll get into this a little later, your day-to-day operations will not change that much. But so like I said, 454B and R32 are your two big players in the commercial comfort cooling and residential comfort cooling world.
Yep. And we'll see a variety of them in the commercial applications as well. And we will be discussing some of the commercial recovery and evacuation equipment available through NAVAC.
Yes.
Right. So NAVAC has looked at not just having the residential tools prepared, but even our larger capacity equipment. And so we'll look at what those are and look at a whole lineup of new A2L compatible tools. So really, I mean, when we look at what's the why behind all of this?
Big brother.
That is true. That is absolutely
Big brother.
true.
So you start looking into ozone depleting potential and you look at their GWP.
Right.
And if you look on the presentation here, and if you want, you can go ahead and move on to the next one there. I think that's the one I'm looking for. Oh, no, it's not. Go back.
Yeah, we can hang out on this one.
All right. So when you look at the GWP, so R32 has a GWP of 625 and R14A has 2088. And if you know, the number is, I think it's 700, or is it higher than that? Refresh my memory.
So when we look at the technology transition rule, that's what we're going to be focused on right now. We do
Mhm.
anticipate to see changes in that along the way. So we are beginning at that 700, and then now we're going to be, as we progress, focusing on lower GWPs. But so right now, that's primarily what we're going to be looking at for a majority of the equipment.
And the reason that I bring this up is because of that 700 mark. A lot of people have asked, well, why doesn't R32 end up getting phased out? Right there's your reason why. It's 625. It's underneath that 700 mark. So that's the reason for the transition, as well as, like I said, the GWP factor. And you've got ozone depleting factors as well, but we're focusing on GWP.
Yeah, because if we look at the long-term HFC phase down, most of the refrigerants that we're comfortable with, like R410A, 134A, 404, they're all high global warming potential refrigerants. So even our 32 and our 454B, which is a blend of 32 and 1234YF, they are HFC-based refrigerants, and they are part of the entire phase down that we're going to have through the Kigali Amendment as well as the AIM Act. But if we look at like those GWPs, we can actually produce 3 times as much R32 as what we could R410A because of the GWP. So that's really what we're doing, is we are focusing on these GWPs and getting as low as we possibly can. But in that process, we've always talked about this as there's kind of this uncomfortable teeter-totter effect, right?
Yeah.
As our GWP goes down, our flammability goes up. And so what does that mean? Well, that means we just really have to pay attention to the capabilities of our tools. So this is a big tie. I'm sure you get this, right? What makes a tool A2L compatible? What have you seen in the industry for A2L compatible? Have you heard a lot about that?
Everything. Actually, I'm going to start selling A2L compatible water jugs.
Oh, boy, that's an interesting marketing gig. So it really kind of comes down to, you are going to see a lot of products on the market that will have A2L compatible stickers on them, but what and why, right? Well, that's a question we have been asking a lot, especially like from our tool manufacturers. And what we're learning is that there are going to be some products, there's probably already products we've seen out there that were almost self-certified, right? Haven't really been through testing procedures, haven't had a redesign or been reevaluated for the purposes, but you guys do that a lot. And so let's kind of talk about what things can we do when we're looking at our tool selections. Even if I'm just a manufacturer of tools, what things are we looking at to make our tools more compatible?
Well, so with us, when it came down, and we're focusing on the recovery machine due to the slide presentation right now, when we talked about it, one, we wanted it to be A2L compatible. We also wanted it to be more efficient.
Oh, sure.
In our industry, we've come up with all kinds of tricks and trades, molecular subcooler, bucket device.
Done faster.
Get things done faster. We here at NAVAC, part of what we do is we actually train everyone who's willing to listen, anyone who's willing to invest in themselves. And so we actually go around and we teach the right process.
Absolutely.
That's fine. But we had to sit back and assess what could we do with our equipment to make it more compatible and more efficient. So if you look on the chart here, you've actually got the components that these recovery machines consist of. You've got a fan, a compressor, a condenser coil, and then you've got your user interface.
Okay.
So when it came to the fan, we wanted it to move a lot of air.
That makes sense, because even when we talk about mitigation is simply a matter of shutting a unit off, isolating refrigerant as much as possible, and moving air to reduce that potential for ignition.
Yep. Okay. I'd say keep the refrigerant under the lower flammability limit.
Yeah.
And so when we did that, we wanted a high CFM, but more importantly, we also wanted multiple if possible.
Sure.
And so we included multiple fans in some of our recovery units. Then you look at our compressor, and this is where we inherently became A2L compliant. We went with an inverter-driven compressor. So this is a DC motor.
Makes sense.
This is a sparkless design. So when we did that, we actually became A2L and A3 compliant, certain recovery machines, not all recovery machines.
Okay.
Then after that, you looked at our condenser coil. Well, when we actually went to that inverter-driven compressor, we freed up a lot of the footprint inside of that machine.
Oh, true.
So that made room for the fans that can move more air. It also made room for us to go to a micro-channel coil and fill up the rest of that footprint.
Utilize that space.
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
okay.
Now, and then you had the interface, which we went digital because the vast majority of times when you're looking at it, people aren't paying attention to it because it rattles, it shakes.
Yeah.
So we made it to where you could actually watch it, read it. This eliminated the need for manifold too.
Yep, absolutely. Okay.
Now, with all of these put together, one, it became A2L compliant. Two, it required the technicians to be able to do their job without additional accessories, tricks of the trade. So that's just a really quick, brief
overview of things
Yeah.
that we're looking at, right? So it really comes down to ignition. And so it does ask the question, one of the things that I have been asked before is, I've even seen some products that are A3 compatible, right? So, and really what we're talking about is, as we move forward, we're going to be looking at the design construction. So really, you're probably just getting into, instead of just being intrinsically safe, now we're probably talking about more like explosion proof, right?
It's more or less explosion proof. It's designed in a way to whereas there should be no way, shape, or form any form of ignition should erupt from that machine.
Makes sense.
And whereas when you talk about just A2L compliant, this is the big topic of conversation, to my knowledge, there's no residential guys dealing with A3 yet, right?
No, and we shouldn't be. And even if we do, our primary refrigerant for that would be R290 purified propane. And during the most recent ruling 26, we actually exempted our R290 from the reclamation, so it won't be required to do reclamation and evacuation for reclamation for R290. It's going to be a cut and release. So really, the equipment is, we're not promoting the use of recovering R290s. We're just saying that the equipment has actually been designed so that it could be utilized for that. So we went above and beyond the A2L.
And that's a big part of so we have our NRDD and we have our NRDDF.
Okay.
The NRDDF is rated up to A2L and A3.
I see.
NRDD is rated A2L.
Okay.
And we even tell our customers, contractors, distributors, we tell them that the NRDDF is a little bit of overkill right now, but feel free if you want to go ahead and spend the extra buck to make sure that you're dealing with something that's a lot more safe.
Yep.
It's overkill for the A2L, but there's nothing that says that you can't use it.
Makes sense. Okay. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, hop on in here. Ty, have you got anything before we get going too far?
Well, I have the baby one, right? It has the least of all the features on it, but I do mainly, a little residential work here and there. I don't do the big commercial work anymore. And I love this thing. I've been trying to keep it clean. I haven't dropped it off the truck or nothing like some of my other ones, but it's been great. It doesn't have the digital on it, and I kind of like that, but I do have the Y connector put on. I still haven't finished all my testing I've been doing, but man, it's been awesome. It's compact, it's easy to work with, and I haven't used it for an A2L yet, but so far I've been pretty impressed.
Well, that, and even though they are analog gauges, they are actually oil filled, so they do not bounce around as much.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, very, very cool.
Ty, don't break it.
NAVAC's been kind of sending things to Ty for almost product development.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the things that have been changing in our equipment to be able to comply, to be able to make A2L compatible tools.
Yep. And so when you talk about that, this applies to our A2L rated vacuum pumps. This applies to our recovery machine. So on the screen here, there's a QR code if you're interested that you can actually scan. It'll take you to our site and show you our entire product line of A2L compatible tools. But more importantly, when you're looking at this, first things first, we've already discussed it briefly, but you want to have a sparkless design.
Okay. So no contactors, no potential shorts and arcing on wires, so probably no capacitors, or unless they were completely sealed. So a lot of our traditional vacuum pumps that are permanent split capacitor motor, if they're not designed for A2L, you're actually working with a unsafe.
You're putting yourself in a potentially hazardous situation.
Exactly.
And that's the big part. So NAVAC, we've been producing tools that have been A2L compliant for a while now. So we were prepared whenever we first started hearing about it.
Okay.
But so when you keep going down the list, like you said, sparkless design, there's also sections here that says soft contact power switches. So no hard contacts whenever you flip the switch. What's Ty showing off there?
So this is my old pump. Way before we ever even thought about A2L equipment, but since NAVAC makes tools internationally, they were already ahead of the game. So this had that inverter-driven motor, or the ECM soft startup. It has all those things on it. So it's an amazing pump. I didn't know who NAVAC was when I got this pump, and I've been abused. This pump has been abused. It's crushed tanks. It's fell off roofs. It's rolled around in the back of the truck. It's been left in the rain. It's been ran overnight, and I love this pump. I love NAVAC because of this pump. Like I abuse it. It's like, oh, it's just some other name I haven't heard of, and it doesn't quit. Like it just keeps going. So now it's my primary pump. So the point is, even before we had A2L, like they were selling these in markets that did use A2L.
And that's one of the important topics that we wanted to cover here. It's not that we're telling you you're going to have to go out and replace every tool on your vehicle, right? What we're saying is that let's evaluate the tools that we have. If you already have a product that is DC driven, that is sparkless, that is truly a A2L compatible, because remember, we're not, as an industry, we haven't set a regulation and said, okay, this is what we're going to do and everyone's going to follow this. There's been a variety of different certifications that people have been utilizing, looking at them, but what it really comes down to is the environment. Is it being designed for the environment that it's going to be used in? And so some of our traditional tools are not going to be compatible. They're going to put you, like you said, in that potential of a hazardous scenario. So evaluate. And this is really what we get back to, is evaluating your products. So I agree, Ty. One of my favorite products is the little bitty DC 4 CFM pump, which we'll probably talk about some of the even smaller than that are battery operated. Yeah, exactly, right? And I've used the one I had for years and was a very good product. So that kind of a product would be considered A2L compatible. May not be tested as currently. I'm not sure how we've looked at some of our previous products, but we're absolutely showing you the ones that are being evaluated and updated to be able to be A2L compatible.
Yep. And so continuing on down the list that you see here on the screen, one, we already talked about sparkless. You know that we've switched to a DC brushless motor because that inherently freed up a lot of space for us to make these tools more efficient, to make your job less of a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But on top of that, if you look down there, covered connections for all electrical terminations.
Okay.
So we're referring to either you're insulating these electrical terminations or they're covered in a resin. So in the event that there ever was a potential for an arc or a spark
connection or something,
it is never exposed to the gases in the event of a catastrophic failure of the machine.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Some good questions and comments that have came through. R1, 2, 3, 4. You know, I really kind of I'm with you, right? When we start talking about these potentials, it's more about understanding the environment we work in. Like I think about myself, right? If I think about the combustibility of refrigerants, we already work around some pretty highly flammable things like A3s, our natural gas and LP. You know, we are intentionally igniting A3 highly flammable gases in controlled environments.
Yep.
Well, what we're talking about is trying not to have any ignition at all for an A2L, which is only a mildly flammable refrigerant that has to be in a pretty specific concentration with a high energy ignition.
It actually takes a really perfect storm in order for these refrigerants to ignite.
In a standard residential light commercial installation.
So there's actually been testing done that you can do some research on. You can find that they actually had an apparatus, which is how they determine the flammability of
Absolutely.
refrigerants. But more importantly, and I always say this in my trainings, I say, in case you're unaware, almost any form of matter can become a fuel if placed in the right environment.
Yeah.
When it comes to the A2L, again, lower flammability limit. They are slightly flammable. They don't just explode. They don't go boom. Now A3s,
that's a whole nother story.
And
we'll get into them one day. We're just not there yet, right? And by the way, while we're talking about those flammable conditions, NAVAC has worked very closely with us to do training. And so if you want to get a hold of NAVAC for training in your local distributors, make sure to reach out to them and stay contacted. To be able to get scheduled for some of those training classes, you can always work with ESCO as well. We have a variety of training resources on A2Ls. So if you want to learn more about that, we encourage you to dive deeper into the actual fundamentals and practices of that. So really, we're just here today to kind of talk about the whole tool side of it and what's changing and why that is actually changing. Okay, so let's talk about some of these things that have been done to get into that spark ignition resistant characteristic.
Keyword is resistant.
Exactly.
So as an example on the screen here, remember I said there's the NRDD, which is A2L, and then there's the NRDDF. So if you look on the screen, this is actually the NRDDF, and this is a thread-in power plug for the NRDDF. Now, when people look at this, a lot of the question is, well, why would you need that? Well, one, it's insulated. It prevents it from ever arcing. But in addition to that, let's say that for some unknown reason, you happen to trip over your cord while you were working on an A3 refrigerant.
Yeah.
You rapidly pull that cord out of a system that's running,
right,
it'll arc.
Yep, I get that.
So this prevents that potential hazardous situation.
So we're locking in the power cord on the device.
We're locking it in. It's insulated. There's no way it's coming out unless you take the time to actually unscrew it and take it out yourself.
I get that. So I think back about one of my older recovery units that I have that is a different manufacturer, is a DC motor, but has a removable plug.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't thought about that until now. But yeah, absolutely. You have a pretty significant amount. If that thing's running and gets pulled, we all know what happens when electricity gets pulled during a high current load, and we get arcing, right?
But you shouldn't be doing that anyway.
No, absolutely. All right, so that's a pretty significant change on the piece of equipment. Let's, I don't know if I can, let me see if I can get us down, blow this up a little bit better. Okay.
I'd say, so now if you look on the screen, this right here is our NRDDF, and as you can see at the top of the screen, this says A2L, A2, and A3 compatible. A lot of guys, when I actually talk to them, they don't even realize that there's anything, and gals, sorry, that there's anything between A2L and A3. They just assume that it's A2L and A3.
Exactly.
A2L, when we talk about how flammable these refrigerants are, they were not as flammable as an A2. They definitely weren't as flammable as an A3, but more flammable than an A1. They earned their own designation.
That's exactly right.
And so you can actually see that again with those research where they did the apparatus, which I love talking about that. I love looking at the test videos of that too.
Yeah.
But there's statistics of the NRDDF are actually here on the screen. And again, if you can't see this or if you want more info, you can actually check it out on our website. Now, Clifton, is the next slide the UL sticker?
I think it is. And if anyone wants to see the flammability of these, I actually do have a video on our YouTube channel. It's called the Flammability, Are Refrigerants Flammable? And so I go through the flammability of A1, A2, A2L, and A3 with a direct spark ignition, a silicon carbide, a silicon nitride, as well as open flame, and kind of show those in vapor and liquid states. Remember, those are kind of drastic scenarios, but to show those different levels of flammability. And Ty and I were just talking about A2s a couple of days ago, how there are actually a fair amount of A2 refrigerants out there. We don't typically use them in our industry, but there are absolutely A2 refrigerants in the industry.
On top of that, when you think about it too, is that testing apparatus. They did an A1 test in that apparatus, and believe it or not, there's a flame in the apparatus. But again, keep in mind, this is in a laboratory setting.
Exactly.
Perfect concentration.
Yep, absolutely. No, I guess that wasn't the slide I was thinking about. It should be, where did you go?
Bear with us a second here.
Yeah, give me just a second. We had one that,
there it is. Now, this is a big one. Okay, and this is one of mine, and I'm sure NAVAC's favorite topics of conversation. The term UL. Okay, if you look on the screen here, you've got UL listed, and then you've got the CUS UL listed. These are safety certifications, all right? It's important to understand the difference between the safety certification, because almost anything you look at has that logo.
Yeah, UL, Underwriter Laboratories.
Yeah, but if you look on the back of our NR7, which I believe Ty has handy right there, it actually says on the back, UL verified. Let's see, he's got it good. So it says UL verified on the back of it. Now, this is on our recovery machines, and this was an additional step that we took in trying to become compliant with the A2L and the A3 stuff.
Okay.
Because to my knowledge, I don't know if anyone else is, but I know that we are. Okay. And we took this step just to be a step ahead of everything.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of UL-rated pieces of equipment for A2L yet.
Well, you may see the UL safety certified.
But you need to be able to make sure what that is. Is it for safety certified, or is it the actual
UL
piece
verified.
of equipment verified? Because there is a big difference. And I was talking to a person, a different piece of our industry, we were talking about UL certified. The difference between a recognized and certified is about a $30,000 application per piece. So, and the time that it takes to be able to test those in those applicable environments. So it takes a lot more to make sure that something is properly tested and certified. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So I'm going to back up real quick. There was that link if anyone's looking for that. Thank you for popping that up there for us. And then it'll probably stay in the chat as well. That takes you over to that flammable refrigerant video. So I'm going to back up a couple slides. That was my fault for having that one in the wrong location. So let's just we'll just talk some general A2L safety, and then we'll get a little bit more specific on them, okay?
Yep. So like I said before, if you've been doing it right the entire time, your day-to-day operations aren't going to change that much. Something that we should all already be well aware of is when you're working in a confined space.
Sure.
Any gas in a high enough concentration can displace oxygen, causes asphyxiation, causes you to pass out.
So true.
Yeah. And so this is no different when we talk about A2L. You should be doing this regardless, whether it's an A2L, an A1, an A3, it doesn't matter. But something that's a little different, now this is a recommendation,
right?
Not a regulation, is the 10-foot rule.
True.
And the 10-foot rule simply applies, Hickanese don't speak very good English. So the 10-foot rule actually is just referring to whenever you're actually going to do your installation, do a 10-foot inspection around the space to make sure that there's no potential hazardous anything there. When I refer to that, the most common one that I've heard people bring up is a natural hot water tank with a standing pilot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Yes, standing gas water heater, probably a good thing to shut that off while we're doing work in that area.
Yep, you want to shut it off. And on top of that, you want to try to make sure that there's nothing that could be potentially arcing or a potential hazard. So I've seen some side jobs when I used to do that, where somebody would just throw the basic light switch disconnect on the unit.
Yeah, sure.
And whenever you throw it, you would see this lovely little blue flash.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if that's the case, make sure that you correct that before you ever start actually working with the A2L.
Absolutely. If I'm in a laundry room or a basement and I've got a washer or a dryer that's running as well, probably need to make sure to shut those off while I'm actually doing my installations.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's a very good point to bring up. That's something we'll have to start talking a little bit more about going forward, is the whole area of installation, both interior and exterior.
This is my favorite slide.
Yeah, this one actually brings up a lot. So I had some questions about this at one of the last conferences I went to. I started asking a bunch of our leak detection manufacturers what they were doing to prepare for A2L, and they're like, yeah.
Well, so I'm going to go ahead and do the full disclaimer.
Okay.
That pictured leak detector is not A2L compliant. I just put it in there as a reference.
Okay. All right, I see Ty pulling up. Where we're at, Ty.
What about this one?
We can't use a halide detector?
This no-go, you sure?
No.
But they make such a pretty green and blue flame, Ty.
So, Ty, that would be the equivalent of me saying it's okay for them to do the old school way of looking for a natural gas leak.
With a lighter?
Yeah, a lighter on a black iron pipe trying to find a leak.
That's right.
So, back at the slide, so that is a halide leak detector. And if you don't know what that is, it's actually a leak detector that used an open flame and would change color whenever you detected a refrigerant.
Yep.
Now, obviously, because of the open flame, you cannot use that. You also can't use the lighter and just chase around the lines and see if you find a leak.
That's right.
So,
that's true. It actually produces fun. When you think of smaller amounts, but yes, it does.
But so whenever you are doing a leak search, we would recommend that you do find one that's A2L compliant. So typically something along the lines of like a hydrosonic leak detector.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing a lot.
Yeah,
right.
I'd say so. The hydrosonic leak detectors, there is no spark, there's no potential to them, to my understanding.
Yes.
But you cannot use the halide. You cannot use just your run-of-the-mill leak detector. Please make sure to check with your manufacturer, whether it's us or someone else. We're happy to help either way, and I'm sure your manufacturer will be happy to help as well.
I guess I hadn't realized that NAVAC had a refrigerant leak detector.
A lot of people don't. We have a leak detector. We got a multimeter.
We were talking about the multimeter. We're going to bring that up and talk about it here in a little bit. So we may bring that in here in a little bit if we get time and share. We're going to do some demonstrations too. Since we'll have a little bit of time towards the end of the presentation, we're actually going to walk through some of the different equipment, and we can do some proper installation of an evacuation. If you guys want to do some hands-on class, we'd definitely be up for that.
Yeah, so this is a big one too.
Okay, yeah. In the past, how do we discharge a capacitor so it didn't light us up?
You stick a screwdriver.
That's right.
Across it. or if you were a jerk, you stuck it to the helper's
You hand
leg.
it to the helper.
Yeah. So you can't discharge capacitors with a screwdriver anymore for obvious reasons. There's a huge arc that occurs when you do that. So when it comes to your field practices, this is one of the things that is 100% changing in your day-to-day. You actually need to have an actual capacitor discharger. You can get it from your distributor. I don't necessarily recommend getting it from Amazon. I'm not saying that people don't.
Right. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that real quick. We haven't really talked about the refrigerant, the A2L recovery cylinders. Ty, you want to tell people about some of the A2L recovery cylinders that you've found out on the internet?
Well, I've been trying to get an A2L cylinder and I can't find one. I've contacted every manufacturer that I know and I can't get a hold of one. So as soon as I get one, yeah, it'd be great. Now, I did find one online that claimed to be able to handle A2L refrigerants, and when I got it here, it was bad. The valves were super cheap. The protector part of it didn't come above the valves, so if it flips over, you turn it upside down and do anything, like the valves it's just sitting on the valves itself. There was a little chinky ball valve on it. There was no DOT rating on it whatsoever. There was when it comes to like the water capacity, none of that was on there. Like there's a little tag that somebody stuck on there. Like it was pretty bad. And so I cut it open so we could see inside, and there was no coating on the inside of it like some of their tanks have. Yeah, it was scary of how little the price difference was and how lower the quality was, and it was. And then if you got to think, it's unlikely that a supply house will take that in exchange like we do. So
Exactly.
yeah, I did a video about that. But as soon as I find an A2L tank, I'll be glad to do a video on it.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with Kate Horton from Hudson Technologies. I had a podcast that I released here recently on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC podcast, where we talked about the availability of A2L cylinders because there was still some determination on left-hand thread versus right-hand thread on the cylinders themselves. So they have already been receiving A2L refrigerants back at Hudson Reclamation Centers. So what they've been recommending is currently using an existing refrigerant cylinder, but labeling it that it is a flammable refrigerant and what refrigerant it has in there. Going forward, we're going to see red bands on those. If you want to take the extra step and precaution, it's worth grabbing some red tape, red masking, and actually putting a red band on that so that it's aware at the distributor and further on that it is an A2L. Because A2L refrigerants are completely available if you're not aware. R32, 454B, they're stocked in all of our distribution centers now. So A2L refrigerants are here to stay, our friends.
And that red band is not as good as a rock band, but it'll serve its purpose.
Oh, if I only had my Roadcaster here, I'd have the clink and woo in the background for you, Ty. All right, so let's talk a little bit about evacuation when we're working with A2L refrigerants.
All right. So when we talk about evacuation, like we said before, one, make sure that your tool is A2L rated.
Yes.
And again, whether it's a NAVAC pump or whoever it is, just reach out to your manufacturer and confirm with them. It just takes 2 seconds to reach out and find out. I know 90% of people throw away the manual as soon as they get the toy out of the box. So I get that. But when it comes to evacuation with an A2L, like I said, make sure that this is actually best practices too. But whenever you're using a vacuum pump, you're evacuating an A2L system, before you ever started to actually evacuate that system, you want to make sure you purge it with nitrogen. That way, if there is any residual refrigerant still inside, you're flushing it out.
Right.
In addition to that, make sure that you, again, use the 10-foot rule whenever you're working on it. Use large diameter hoses, use core remover tools, and take the cores out. Now, on the chart here, you've got another QR code that will actually take you to our evacuation presentation.
Excellent.
But more importantly, what I love about this presentation is right here on the size versus flow. So a 1/4-inch service hose is only going to pull 1 CFM. Now, it's only pulling 1 CFM, and a lot of guys are still pulling through their manifold. Now, the reason that this is an issue is because if you're pulling 1 CFM, even if you're pulling from both ports, you're only going to pull 2 CFM. More importantly, if you leave the cores in, you're only going to pull about 0.5 per port. So whenever you're pulling 0.5, you're pulling a total of 1 from both 1/4-inch service ports. 1/4-inch hose, you're only going to pull 1 CFM. The manifold, the 1/4-inch hose, the depressors, the cores, they all act as a restriction. They slow the process down. And this is regardless of if it's an A2L, an A1, whatever you're working on.
Exactly.
This is how this applies. On top of that, those hoses that he had in the first hand, the blue hose here, that's a permeable hose. And that's a really fancy way of saying that in the event of a high pressure situation, that hose is actually designed to foam out and alleviate the pressure. If it can let something out, it can let something in too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Whereas the two other black hoses are non-permeable hoses. These are vacuum rated hoses. And we sell these hoses. They can be used for evacuation or recovery. However, do not use the same hose for one job. One dedicated hose for evacuation and dedicated hose for recovery. And the fun thing too is that orange hose that you guys see on the table, That's an A2L hose. So where he talked about the reverse threaded,
Right.
every manufacturer is starting to sell an adapter. We sell an adapter, but we also sell this hose, and you can see by the split design
Right.
on
See,
that
the
particular.
knurling is different here.
Yep.
So we're used to our traditional solid knurl on all of our refrigerant hoses. And going forward, even with the adapter on our left-hand thread, we're now using the separated or serrated knurling. And I'm very much in favor of this because, like, when we talk about evacuation, I prefer to remove manifolds in all scenarios because of
Yep.
all the potential leaks, all of the O-rings. If I'm using another adapter, I'm just adding an additional potential leak on my system.
Absolutely. And the other part of it too is coming from someone who worked out in the field, and I understand this just as well as any other tech would.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of technicians losing these little adapters.
Yeah. On the job, going, all right, I got my tank, I got my. Wait a minute.
Take it back to the distributor, still leave the actual adapter on it. If you're losing an adapter, I get it. If you're losing multiple sets of bright orange hoses,
that's a whole other scenario.
I say there's not a whole lot.
I love the orange hose factor. And we're actually going to be, if we get a little bit of time left, which I think we will, we're actually going to run over to the recovery station that we have set up over here. And we're going to talk about some of the entire array of our orange hoses that's now being manufactured by NAVAC. Really cool. I'm kind of liking the idea.
And the A2L in the 1/4 inch and in the 3/8.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Ty.
Talking about vacuuming, we talk about the bigger hoses, removing the valve cores, speeding up that vacuum. I've had a lot of people say, well, this new thing about doing it, and it's really not a new thing. This book, Review of Vacuum for Service Engineers, was written back in, I think, the 1950s. It was just recently redone, and it talks about all of these things, such as conductance speed. And it talks about when you get that vacuum down lower, how the size of that hose makes a difference for the pressure difference and how you get that water vapor to move out. So, and there's math and formulas in here that go way beyond my comprehension, but they do a really great job of breaking it down to understand it. So when we talk about these bigger hoses, non-permeable, all these things, it's not a new concept. It's just new to a lot of us. So it's been around for a very long time.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I'm always an advocate of removing cores, using larger hoses, having the right tools. So it basically comes down to if you haven't evaluated the tools that you currently use, now's the time. That's all. Father's Day is right around the corner, by the way.
Yeah, and like we said too, on top of that, something that's really cool about this trade in this industry, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I know Ty has seen it, is this trade is evolving at a rapid pace.
Absolutely.
Especially when you take into consideration the skill gap that we currently face. So what happens is, like he just said, it's not new information, but sometimes the process that evolved gets overlooked by bad habits.
Yeah.
Because, well, I didn't know any better.
Exactly. Well, and I always kind of relate that to like the equipment. We had a couple decades, if not 3 or 4, where the technology didn't really change much, which meant we didn't get pushed into looking at our own skills and our own techniques. So now that technology is changing, now that we have new tools and we have new refrigerants, it's the perfect time to go, have I been doing things potentially wrong, or have better things happened, better practices come about?
It is always, one, it's amazing to me because, again, I travel the country and I do this. The people who say, well, I've never even heard of using large diameter hose. I've always just pulled it through my manifold. Never had an issue.
I ran a 50-foot 1/4 inch hose, so I didn't have to take my vacuum pump on the roof.
Well, and that's the biggest thing too. So we're all we're all contractors. We're all technicians, and time is money to us.
That's exactly right.
And so, in order for us to be the best tech that we can be, whether you're a service tech, an installer, controls technician, product engineer, whatever you are, you have to understand that when a process evolves, it's not to make your life harder.
Right, it's to be more efficient.
It's to be more efficient. And with that skill gap, if we can make 5% across each state that much more efficient, even 2% efficient, it helps mitigate that skill gap.
Absolutely.
Because we have filled it by teaching the proper practice. We can touch more customers this way.
And that's really what we're here to do, is to talk about these, best practices, talk about using the right equipment, evaluating the tools that we do have. Let's talk about some of the recovery practices for A2Ls as well.
Well, so first of all, full disclaimer, Clifton mentioned something about the A3s and the potential to not have to recover them.
Right.
That does not apply to the A2Ls.
Right.
you still have to recover.
So it's still part of the 608 of the Clean Air Act. I mean, we're required.
Yep, and like I said before, you need to use a rated recovery machine. So it has to be rated to at least A2L, A3, A2. Those are, again, A2L is what you want. A2, A3 is a little overkill.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with purchasing the equipment.
Absolutely.
Now, whenever you do that, you also need to make sure that the tools you're using are A2L rated as well. So, like we said before, we got a service hose there if you should choose it, but we actually do sell the 3/8 recovery hose or A2L hoses. They are reverse threaded, and we sell the adapter as well.
Okay.
Now, on top of that, make sure after you have recovered it, just like we said before, purge it with nitrogen. Okay, you don't want any residual refrigerant
absolutely.
in there.
Yeah, that's a great point, which we've never done before. Really, we've never talked about doing that with our recovery units.
No, and on top of that, you got to think too. A lot of techs, whether they admit it or not, how are they typically taking a compressor out of a unit? Are they cutting it out?
I ain't gonna go there. They're absolutely torching.
They're torching it. And so if you're not purging that system before you ever open it and there's residual refrigerant in there, you potentially put yourself in another hazardous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point.
So purge the system with nitrogen. Use A2L rated tools and equipment such as our NR7, our NRDD, or NRDDF if you should so choose it, and make sure that you're recovering the refrigerants. Just because they have a lower DWP does not mean that you can vent them.
Yep.
No 5-gallon bucket tricks.
No, absolutely. No water in the bucket. Actually, Ty, I actually have got a really, really old diagram. I'll have to show you sometime.
I thought this was going somewhere else.
No, it actually was it was a system. It didn't call it system evacuation. It called it refrigerant. I don't know. I have to look it up. And yeah, it's like a 1940s diagram that came from an equipment manufacturer that was actually a hand-drawn sketch of putting an R12 hose in a bucket of water during the disposal of the appliance. It's kind of crazy, but that's how things have changed.
Remember what I said, bad habits need to be left alone.
That's exactly right. All right, so let's kind of talk about some of the transport a little bit. This is one that's still in the evolutionary mode right now.
Yep. I'd say because it's changed, I think, 2 or 3 times, because when we first heard about transporting these A2L refrigerants, it said that you had to transport them in the vertical position.
Yes.
And later on, no, you can actually transport them in the horizontal position, but you have to make sure that the pressure relief device is actually at the 12 o'clock position.
Yep.
So whenever you would slide it into your refrigerant rack, you need to make sure the pressure relief device is facing straight up at you. And the reason for this is because in the event that it did try to alleviate, one, it's a less volatile reaction because it's in contact with the vapor side.
Yes.
And two, it also could prevent it from turning into a torpedo because it's going to be pushing down into the rack instead of lifting up.
So true. Yeah, it's a very good point. And really, when we talk about that, when we start getting into our actual A2L cylinders in recovery, we're going to be talking about a pressure relief device that is not a stay open and blow the entire charge of the cylinder. It's going to be, once I get a high enough pressure, I need to be able to release that and to be able to close. And the reason we wanted it in that 12 o'clock or in that vapor position, if I had a high enough pressure and my valve opened and I had liquid refrigerant passing through there, it could freeze into position because of the boiling off of our refrigerant on the mechanism. So it's very important that be in that.
So the device will act almost like a rupture discard on a chiller.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. All right. So let's look at some other best practices real quick while we're right here.
So when you talk about the charging, one, you have to be aware that there are a bunch of different metrics come into this. You got MAC, maximum allowable charge. You got RCL. Then you have to be aware of your mitigation strategies, M1 and M2.
Yes.
And so all of these play a fact in whenever you're charging a system or you're installing a system, you're performing a repair, you need to make sure that you're following that lower flammability limit, because if it is allowed to exceed it, you produce a hazardous situation. Now, you don't want to ever overcharge these systems. And you also want to make sure that if you are installing the system, we'll say somewhere potentially hazardous, where you're exceeding the RCL or the MAC, that you start to look into the M2 strategies.
Yes, exactly right.
And if you're not aware of what M1 and M2 are, Clifton, you want to cover that, or you want me to take a shot?
Yeah, you're welcome to. I mean, what we're talking about is M1, M2, and M3 are going to be the charge requirements before we start looking at mitigation. So we look at M1, which is, I think it's 3.9 pounds for 3.9 for 32 and 4.1 for 454B, I believe. Below that, we're not going to have mitigation requirements, although some manufacturers are actually going to add mitigation on their M1 equipment just to be over prepared. So we're basically talking about ductless split systems,
Yeah.
right? So some of the ductless split systems will have mitigation, some will not. Most of them will not be required, but some of the manufacturers will. Once we get above that, and then we're talking above 4 pounds, we're into our residential split systems, our light commercial systems. Those are going to have mitigation controls, and we've done one class, but we're going to come back and we're going to do some more mitigation classes here very soon. We're going to bring up some RDS refrigerant detection sensors. Hi, I see you antsy. You got something there?
Oh, I was going to try to show that pop-off valve, but I can't get it to show up on the camera. But it's
Oh yeah, I see it down there below the service valve. Okay, so it's not the same kind of disc that we used to see in our previous jugs of refrigerant. It's actually a open and reset style disc. Okay, very cool. All right, so before we go diving into some additional just standard best practices and talking about some equipment, we want to thank you for this time. We really appreciate you all hanging out with us. And to learn more about training from NAVAC, where can people go to, Jesse?
You can email me and my team directly at training@navacglobal.com. And if you have an inquiry or you want us to come out and perform one of our classes, you can reach out to your local distributor and they'll get in contact with us. Okay,
fantastic. So we're going to talk about equipment and tools a little bit more. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to dive into? Yeah, I did see a question come in. We're not talking about settling. Yeah, we're just really talking about our A2L refrigerants. Todd, thank you for joining us. We hope that we've clarified some of this for everyone. I know there's a lot of conversations. There's a lot of potential communications in the industry. We wanted to help clarify a little bit about what that is. I know Paul had a question a while ago about what is the difference between certification or certified and verified. And that's kind of what we were talking about. You can follow a procedure, and if you follow that procedure and you fit those checkoff lists, it can be in that certified. But to be able to be verified means it's actually been tested. It's went through a proper procedure through a listed laboratory and validated that it meets a certain specification, Paul.
Additional testing requirements are required.
Absolutely. All right, so what do we want to dive into? We want to go through a few pieces of equipment. I know I've got a couple of things that I would like to point out when we start talking about new equipment. I'm really excited about some like the new manifolds that you're now bringing into the market. Talking about our battery-powered vacuum pumps.
You actually just brought up a good A2L thing.
All right, let's hear it.
Because it's actually popped up. I've had a lot of guys, and I don't blame them for asking.
And gals.
A lot of techs.
There you go.
A lot of techs actually asked to say, well, what about hand tools? What about manifold gauge
well,
sets?
I seen a question come through a while ago about what about a manifold gauge.
And so the simple answer to that is manifold gauges, your hand tools, are inherently A2L compliant because they have no spark to them. Manifold gauges included. Now, the only exception to this is if you start beating your wrench off the side of the unit.
Yeah, especially on an aluminum casing. Now we do have the potential.
So with that being said, let's see what manifold gauges would you recommend?
That's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So whenever I say you want to recommend a manifold gauge set, one, so you do want to have, in my personal opinion, you want to have a dedicated manifold gauge set. So I used to be a chiller tech. I had a dedicated set of gauges just for the chiller.
Absolutely.
Then I had the gauges for everything else.
Yeah.
When it comes to the A2Ls, you want to also help to prevent cross-contamination. And on top of that, unless you're going to reference your PT chart and remember it off the top of your head, you're going to need something to reference it with.
Yeah.
Now, fun fact to you, though, some of the A2Ls that we're working with, the pressure-temperature relationship is almost identical up to a certain temperature.
Yeah, they're very, very close. So I've actually got a comparison. I've been prepping a class to do a 410, 32, 454B comparison. We actually did a little bit in one of our presentations with Bosch. We actually went through just a 410, 32 or 454B comparison with Honeywell, but I won't go through the three of them. So we look at it both on the low side and the high side of the system. And actually, DE, I'm glad that you mentioned this, right? So DE wanted to know if we can do a proper steps for recovery, and we would love to do that. We actually have a station already set up just in case we had these kind of questions. So we're actually going to do that for you. If anyone hangs around long enough, we'll actually go through and we'll go through a proper evacuation as well. And we'll talk about some of the DC controls there. So we're going to skim on over. We're going to move over to the recovery side, and we'll dive a little deeper into some proper recovery techniques.
I'm going to grab this and take it over with us.
Okay. Now, mind you, Ty and Mike, when we get over here, I won't be able to see the screen very well. I'll try to spin it around in case any questions or anything pops up. All right, so here at our master station, we've got a variety of things going on. I'll let you walk through this, Jesse. I'll turn the screen so that we can get a better view of the audience.
All right, so one of the first things that we talk about when we do recovery, and this applies to our evacuation training as well, we tell you to ditch your manifold.
100%.
Now, the reason we do this is because we're technicians, and again, the process evolved to make us more efficient, not to make our lives harder. What does this result in? Less hardware that we got to carry around.
Yeah.
So you don't
For
got to
sure.
lug this around all the time, even though it is very nice. That's our new.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a little bit too. It's actually a really cool device.
So what you see here is we've actually got a full setup. This is actually a small refrigerant circuit.
Yep.
Hooked up. You have two hoses coming from the high and low side. These are 3/8 recovery hoses. These then connect to our Y fitting right here. So this is 3/8 to 3/8 with a 1/4 inch.
So what would be the reasoning for using a Y fitting bringing into the inlet connection of our recovery unit?
The Y fitting allows us to use two hoses when we're recovering without the use of a manifold.
Oh, it's just replacing the manifold gauge and removing a dozen O-rings.
Removing a dozen O-rings, removing restrictions because these are 1/4 inch hoses.
Yeah.
They're not a larger diameter.
Okay.
And on top of that, again, less hardware, a lot easier on the back, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Now, from that Y fitting, though, you'll see that we have a filter dryer located right here at the inlet of the machine.
Very important. It's probably the best insurance a person could buy for your recovery unit.
I don't know how much these may cost to everyone that's watching, but so I estimate somewhere between $15 to $20, depending on your distributor.
Yep.
That $15 to $20 component can protect a potential $1,000-some investment.
Right.
And so as a $10, $15, $20 insurance policy, I would invest in that 100%.
Yep.
Rules of thumb for changing it out, I would recommend once every 6 months if you suspect nothing.
Yep.
But one, if you do recover some form of a contaminated refrigerant, change it immediately.
Yep.
And the other one is if you're really into it, you can actually do the TD across it. If it's starting to show more than 3, you want to change it.
Exactly. I was actually doing a class one time, and I was working with a filter dryer manufacturer, and we were talking about replacing the filter dryers on the inlets of recovery units. And he said, and it made the most sense to me. He said, the last time you went to have your oil changed, did they charge you for the rags that they used? And I said, oh, I forgot about that. He said, so you don't have to mark up the filter dryer. Just charge them the cost of the filter dryer as an ancillary item, and you have provided a good service to the customer, and you have now verified that you've recovered any removed any contaminants that could have been in the system, your longevity for your expensive piece of equipment, right?
Yep.
So we want to maintain our equipment to last a long time. So it's very inexpensive insurance, and a homeowner is not going to squawk over a filter dryer if it's explained the purpose for that. So
and your first one's on us.
There you go. That's a good point.
First one's on us.
Okay.
Now, after we got our two hoses from the high and low side of the system. They hit our Y, our filter dryer to the inlet. Then we have another 3/8 to a 1/4 inch hose that comes out and actually hits our recovery cylinder. Now, something that I like to point out, and I'm surprised that a lot of people don't realize this.
Yeah.
If you'll notice, what side is this hooked to, Clifton?
So this one's on our blue knob, which are our low side or vapor side of it. Vapor side of the cylinder, with our liquid side or red side having a dip tube going down towards the bottom.
Yep. Now, very important to note, not all recovery cylinders are built the same. This collar coating does not mean anything. I've seen them both ways before. Now, the reason that we have it hooked up to our vapor port is because a lot of people don't know this. Whenever we actually hook to the vapor port, we take our tank
and flip her.
We flip it upside down.
Okay.
We do this for liquid recovery. Now, what are we doing when we do this? So, like he said, there's a dip tube that actually runs inside of the tank. Well, the dip tube, one, believe this or not, builds up additional friction, additional heat from the recovery process. Two, when we take that dip tube out, it can also act as a restriction.
Yeah,
and
that's
slow
so
the process
true.
down.
Yeah.
This allows the liquid refrigerant to stack on
Directly
itself.
fill into the tank.
And the beautiful part is, when you're done, you're ready for vapor recovery.
Yeah.
Just flip it back over.
Boom, and let your vapor go into the top of the tank. Call it quits.
Yep, and you're done.
Awesome.
Now, also be aware of the purge function on the machine.
Yeah.
So in the event that you have recovered, make sure that you purge the machine. The purge function actually isolates the machine itself, so it'll remove any refrigerant still in it. How many times have you seen guys that open up their machines, let a big old cloud out?
Yeah.
Potentially hazardous, because I know at least most of them are probably doing it after they've already set it in the truck.
Right.
They've got their gloves off.
Yeah, and now it's in a confined space. Cool. That's a quick run through. That's some really good stuff. Let's move on over to our evacuation stage while we're here, and let's talk about some proper evacuation setup. So I hope that answered questions. I hope that was what you were looking for there, DE.
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned flipping the tank because I get so much pushback from that, and it's absolutely free to do. Like it's one of those things you can try it yourself and see, and it makes a huge difference, especially that temperature of that tank. Up on a roof in Arizona, Phoenix, we did that. I mean, it's just amazing difference. So it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to take a word for it. Just try it. You'd be surprised at the difference it makes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So true.
Ditch this.
Yeah, ditch the gauge. All right, so let's go over, I think we can actually, yeah, that was pretty close. So let's get over here and let's talk about our evacuation setup and the proper tools that we're utilizing. Now, remember, when we were talking about our A2L products, here's a cutaway of our DC. I'll try to throw in some B-roll footage to show some close-ups of the insides of how we're actually manufacturing our machines.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we wanted to point out, so Jesse, when we were talking about equipment, right? Ideally, we want to get into a DC pump, right?
Yep.
But there's going to be times where we may be looking at our whole arsenal of tools going, okay, I've got a lot of things that I need to replace here. What can I do on a little bit of a budget, but still get all the safety factors that is going to be required for A2L compatible?
Yep. And so a prime example of this is our 7 CFM pump right here.
Okay.
It is listed as A2L compatible, but if you actually look at the specs, it's an AC driven motor.
Right.
And so, well, that would kind of be contradictory to what I just said.
Yeah.
The thing is whenever we designed this, we actually designed it in a way that insulated the actual motor from the rest of the components. So it would not be exposed to any potential hazardous flammable gases that it could ever come into contact with.
Okay.
And that's NAVAC's biggest thing. There's a reason that we have multiple recovery machines, multiple vacuum pumps, and the vast majority of them are all A2L rated.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something for everybody's budget. Not everybody may need to be recovering from a chiller.
True, exactly.
Not everybody may be recovering from a residential refrigerator
either.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, right? Because we're still A2L. Look at this little guy. Isn't that so cute? Right? We're still A2L compatible on a very compact, DC driven, very lightweight. This is actually one of my favorite items to use. I mean, even if you're working up until 3-ton, 4-ton residential split systems, it actually is plenty.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
It really, truly is. But then we can get into some of our larger equipment, which we'll do a product display and show you some of our other larger A2L products once we get into the commercial applications and industrial applications.
Absolutely. And so now the other kicker when we talk about the A2L compliant, now whenever we do that, when you switch to the AC motor, you're going to have some give and take.
Okay.
One of the biggest ones you just mentioned.
Cost.
Well, so it's going to be cost, but it's not going to be as expensive. More or less, it's also going to be heavier.
Oh, yeah. Because we got a PSC, driven AC
But that's
motor.
the biggest thing. With the cost, we may have decreased in cost, but we are not compromising any of the safety features in any of our equipment.
So safety stays the same, cost goes down, weight goes up.
We allow you options.
Okay, that's fair. Sounds good to me.
Now, when we talk about the proper evacuation setup, and we'll do this very brief overview. So one, we have done testing, and this is one of our biggest classes that we actually present. This tank right here, a lot of people, when they see this, actually wonder what this represents. If you go off total volume per cubic foot, this represents a 5-ton system. And a lot of people
the amount of space within all of our tubing and okay. Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, I like that. Actually.
And so we travel with this when we perform our evacuation.
Yeah, it's the same capacity. Here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, we have done it with a 3-hose setup. So this is your 1/4-inch hose. And we even sell 4-port manifold with a vacuum hose.
Yeah.
We still tell you we don't want you to do it that way.
Yeah, right.
So best setup is called a single hose rig. You've got a large vacuum rated, so low to no permeation hose. This is our 3/4-inch big boy. This is a brand new product. And you've got 2 core remover tools. You want to remove the core and your micron gauge. Now, a big part of this, so we time this every time we've done this.
Okay.
With the 3 hose, you're looking at over an hour.
Okay.
To pull this to 500. The 4-port with a large diameter, 1/2 inch, not the 3/8 it comes with, you're looking at about 25 minutes.
Really? Okay.
With this 3/4-inch diameter hose, no cores, core remover tool, and just a micron gauge, I'd be curious as to what your audience thinks how long it would take.
Ooh, I tell you what. So we're going to do that, right? So we're going to fire this up. We're going to do the demonstration here, and let's do. Are we going to do the 7 or we want to do a
Yep,
battery?
we're gonna
Okay,
do
so
7.
we'll use the 7 CFM battery. Ty, have you got any thoughts? I don't want to say because I kind of know.
Well, I'm not gonna let the cat out of the bag, but I tell you that 3/4 inch hose is really awesome because it is flexible. It's short, which I don't need the long hose on it, but man, it is super flexible. And I found a little cheat that I don't know if I'm supposed to say or not, but we have those cool Y connectors. But on the pump, you have 2 different sizes. You got the 1/2 inch size and the 3/8 size.
Right.
If you use the 3/4 inch hose on one side, you can use the 3/8 on the other side, and you can save a Y connector. So I did that the other day just to try, even though I have the Y connector, and it was a pretty cool little way to speed that up that slight little bit more. But yeah, that 3/4 inch hose is super flexible, easy to work with.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to set things up. And so if we think about in the past, now let's all be realistic. In the past, the goal was to be able to get the system removed early, get the new system installed, and get it on vacuum before we went to lunch, right? That's kind of the rule of thumb for a residential split system. And so we typically had it on for an hour or so, whatever that was. Now, so we're going to fire this up, and we're going to let it run for a while, and we're going to see how fast we can actually do this. All right.
So, and important disclaimer, so the mics that we have on are actually really, really good mics. So when I turn the pump on, you're not going to hear it.
Yeah, sure. We probably will head back that way once we fire it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the pump on. We see we've got it valved off right now. Micron gauge is set to 500. When this hits 500, that screen will flash blue. We've got our timer right here. So you guys should be able to see. We can actually zoom in on this. So I'm going to turn the pump on.
Ready? Okay, let's go let this thing run for a little while.
And so a big part of this entire thing is just what you guys and gals, I got it right there.
Good job.
Can do as technicians, as tradesmen and women to be more efficient.
Absolutely.
We take great pride in our craft, in our trade.
Yeah.
We take great pride in a good job and our customers being insanely happy. That's a feeling that only we can get.
Absolutely.
Now, let's say that you had a job where you were performing an evacuation. It's a quoted job. Let's say that they quoted it for 8 hours.
Yep.
Okay, well, you do it the old-fashioned way with the 4-port manifold, or even worst case, 3-port 1/4 inch hoses, don't do cores or nothing.
Yeah.
You may hit that 8 hour mark, or you may exceed it.
True.
Whereas if you follow the process I'm showing you here,
Shed some time,
you may come in under quote.
Yeah.
And the reason that I preach on this is because when we were techs and when we were doing what we're doing now, when I was a tech, I got up and got in the truck every day because I wanted to make a paycheck, provide for my family.
Yeah.
At some point in my career, I was going to talk with my boss about a raise.
Yeah.
Let's say that you implement this and you're coming in under quote.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Every single
Now you
job.
got the validation.
A little easier to ask for that
Let's talk about
raise.
this, Ty. We can't prove anything unless we validate it.
It's a little easier to to warrant that raise if you've got data to back it up. We're techs. We don't deal with hearsay.
Yeah.
We deal with facts and numbers.
Exactly.
I'm getting ready to show you the facts and numbers.
Facts and numbers. Okay. Wow, we're getting pretty close there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's. We're actually getting.
Zoom in on
we're
that.
getting fairly close. Let's head on over here.
So remember, when this flashes blue, that's 500 microns.
Look at that. Less than 2 minutes. That's pretty good. That's actually really, really good. And so, Todd, when I seen your 90 to 100 seconds, I went, boy, he's actually had that opportunity to do this. Yeah. This is exactly what we're talking about, Murph, is that now we can do this in a fraction of time. One of the things that turned me on to NAVAC a long time ago was when they first came out with the little mini, the little rechargeable, and I think that was a 4 CFM. 2.5. I don't remember what the CFM was. It was the little bitty guy, the first generation of it. And I did a demo of a 3-ton installation with a 15-foot line set, and I pulled a 250 micron evacuation in 4 minutes with one of these little guys. And everyone went, "You did what?" I'm like, "Yeah, it really comes down to best practices, exactly like what we're doing here."
So we've actually done a side-by-side comparison. We took it down for this presentation, but we took one of our industrial pumps and we hooked it up to a 1/4 inch hose and pulled on the same tank.
Yeah.
Versus the little guy.
Yeah.
If you follow best practices, Even with our industrial pump, the little guy blows it out of the
Isn't
water.
it crazy to think we can move that much?
Yeah.
James, we're so glad that you're joining us. We're grateful that you're becoming a part of this community. So this is really what we're here to talk about. So A2L residential split systems have actually already hit the distributors. So I've talked to a few manufacturers, and one of our major manufacturers, one of the top three, has already started releasing residential products to their distribution. So within the next few months, we're going to be moving to a lot of A2L residential equipment. If you go anywhere right now, Jesse, and you buy a window air conditioner, it's not been an A1 for
It's
the
an
last year.
A2L.
So they're all A2Ls, they're all R32.
P-tax are the same too.
P-tax are the same way. So you're going to encounter A2L equipment in residential and light commercial in the next few months. And by next year, it's going to be your primary product. So that's the reality of our industry. It's changing, whether you're in residential, whether you're in commercial or industrial. You're going to be seeing A2L refrigerants.
Well, and if you've been in this industry long enough, you'll see that that's the only thing that stays the same.
That's right.
Nothing
Change.
does. Nothing does. But that's the cool thing about this trade. Like I said, we're constantly evolving.
That's right.
So it's never boring.
It's never boring. We're so glad everyone has joined us. I think that kind of covers most of the topics we were wanting to hit today, Jesse. If anyone has any questions, anything that you'd like for us to demo before we hop out of here, I highly encourage you to throw it into the chat. Follow up with us later, cbeck@escogroup.org. You can get NAVAC at
training@navacglobal.com.
Exactly. So if you have any questions going forward, let us know. We'll make sure to get you connected with all of the right training resources. We'll bring these topics on every week. That's what we love doing, don't we, Ty?
Absolutely. I just wanted to add in another thing is you don't see me backing a lot of companies or tools. And what I love about NAVAC is the people. I've known Andrew forever. It seems like I've known Jesse for a while now. I've known some other people on the business side, and they've just been really good people. And they're out here sponsoring education or doing training. If you go to one of their NAVAC classes about evacuation, and they don't try to force you to buy anything. They say, hey, look, we're going to demonstrate our pumps, but they teach you about the practice, about how to make things better. And I think that's amazing. And we all have to eat. Like Jesse, he's got a family. We all have families we have to take care of. So yeah, we need that support. But I love to support companies that take care of education, that help train people for better practices. And that's one of the things that I like about NAVAC, and that's one of the things that got started being using their products.
Clifton got a new toy.
All right, Keith, yes, absolutely. I mentioned this earlier. I forgot to say it. For those that are still hanging on, we got to talk about this because there's two things that's got my attention here. I'm going to let Jesse talk about this one. I'm going to go snag the other one that I just found. Didn't even know about. Two of them, maybe.
So Clifton is very obsessed with our new NX1. So this is our smart manifold. Now, a couple of things with this that's key. I'm going to go ahead and power it on. I'm not sure how well you'll see it on the screen itself. But one, when you look at our temperature clamps, something that we did different is we actually incorporated the temperature measurement in the clamp itself. So you get a measurement right there from the clamp without even having to look at this. But the biggest thing is whenever we actually turn the thing on, when we say it's a smart manifold, you'll notice that this is a 3-port. It's not a 4-port. One, like I said, we don't recommend that you ever pull through a manifold when you're doing an evacuation. But so if you wanted to, one, you've got a leak check mode where you can actually set a timer on it and look at the PSI and see how it drops within that certain time frame. But my favorite is the fact that our evacuation setting on here actually links up to the micron gauge that you see on the tank back there. So what we're doing when we do this is we practice what we preach. We don't want you to ever pull an evacuation through this manifold, but you still need your micron gauge. This allows you to use your manifold while you're actually working on the system. So if you want to put the micron gauge somewhere else and have this somewhere where you can actually see it without having to bend down and look at the system, you have that option. You also have the option to perform your decay test through your micron gauge and it be visible here as well. Now, again, we don't ever recommend that you pull an evacuation through a manifold. That is why this is a 3-port. Now, again, it is A2L compliant. So that being said, Clifton, any other questions on the new product?
No, not that one. I'm gonna just keep handing them to you. I love the video shot that we're at right now. I didn't know that NAVAC even had a voltmeter, so let's quickly talk about that one, and then we're going to get on to my next favorite one.
How many did you grab?
I just a couple of them. I got a warehouse back here. I'm having
Yeah,
fun.
he's raiding the warehouse. So Clifton was unaware, and a lot of other people were unaware. But we do actually sell a multimeter. And I think that the reason that a lot of people aren't aware of it is because, well, they just don't look on our website, and some distributors may not carry it. But so this does everything from your microfarads, AC, DC voltage. You've got the amp clamp, and you've actually got a temperature clamp on here as well. And it is our beautiful black and orange setting, which is absolutely gorgeous, and it matches everything else you got. And then Clifton, it's actually Clifton and my mine both our favorites. This is our thermal imaging camera. Yeah. All right. And so the reason that this is a big thing, at least for me, is there is the potential for non-invasive field testing.
Absolutely. Huge fan of the non-invasive diagnostics.
And it's actually one of the most relatively affordable thermal imaging cameras out there. And you can't see too much. Let's see if we can get Clifton on there. Barely. So it's actually really accurate, so much to the point to whereas if you actually put your hand on the table and you remove it, you'll see the handprint there. Now, when we talk about non-invasive testing, we're actually going to do some research this summer to kind of show you guys what we're referring to. I'm not going to tell them what non-invasive testing I'm going to do because there's no testing.
No, not yet. That'd be another good video.
But so, Clifton, what's your favorite thing about the thermal imaging camera?
Cost.
Cost? I thought it was the footprint.
Footprint was really cool too. I did like that one.
Absolutely. And you can actually...
Is it A2L certified?
What's that, Ty?
Is that infrared A2L certified?
And we'll see you next week on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show.
We're going to say no, Ty.
I think that we are missing something, though. I think we should have a contest or something. Because, Jesse, I think your beard will look really good in NAVAC orange.
Oh.
Hard no.
Yeah.
Look, I cut 2 inches off of it just so you guys could actually see my neck. So that's got to count for something.
Can you go back to where that tank is?
Yeah.
Right. Yep. You don't have to zoom in.
Yeah, that's all right. We can get there.
There you go.
All right. I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love this guy. All right, everyone. It's been so much fun. Jesse, I've really enjoyed this. Grateful to be here. Glad to be at the new NAVAC training facility in Versailles, Kentucky. Make sure to come check it out. Spend some time with the NAVAC team, getting more familiar with using the products. Like I said, all these things that you have seen are right here in the training classroom. All we're doing is panning around to different aspects of the classroom. So look forward to you connecting with NAVAC, staying in contact with us. So excited that this community is growing the way it is. We really look forward to seeing you next year at the 2025 National HVACR Education Conference in Las Vegas. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have topics that you would like covered here at the show, or at the Did You Know show or at the conference, let us know. If you have a class that you would like to be a presenter, we have the applications coming out here in the very near future for applicants for presenting. We're definitely going to be seeing NAVAC and making a big presence at the conference this year. And if there's not anything else, Ty, thank you so much for joining us. And I think we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you all next week. We'll be broadcasting live from the Fujitsu training facility down in Texas. Ty's going to be joining me. Eugene's going to be joining me. So we're going to be hanging out down there and just learning about equipment. We'll be talking about A2Ls and new refrigerants as well and what that'll look like in some of the equipment. So we'll see you all there. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you then on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show.